Hi, good morning. I hope everybody had a great weekend. As we work towards the midterm, I actually wanted to double back a little bit and do a little bit of review. A lot of times, again, we'll put off the review process until just before the midterm, but I want to take a moment to kind of re-engage you all with some of this stuff. And almost everything we're covering, we should have notes on already, but as I've discussed previously, one of the most important things that I really want us to focus is taking the time to really understand this process. So I'm going to go quick through this. I'm going to go quick through this, but I want to walk back through this process and just kind of, bring us up to speed from where we began, and hope that you'll be able to follow along with the story. It's again, in many ways, this is a story of human evolution, if you will. From small groups into the major post-industrial nation that we live in today. And I see Mr. Kinlaw got that book. That's what's up. So again, we're just doing a bit of review here. So these are things you should have already. If there's anything you missed, though, definitely do make note of it. As always, make sure that you're taking notes, not just on what's on the screen, but what's being said. So we talked about again that urbanism, in the way that we understand it, is a really new and fresh process that in the 21st century is the first time ever that more people have lived in cities than farming areas. In 1800, just 3% of the world lived in urban environments. By 1950, we're well into the Industrial Revolution. It's at 29%, 37% by 1975, and by 2050, Stephen, that number is expected to be over 70%. Again, I won't test you as much on numbers, but just understand these contexts and patterns. We got 421 cities now. They got a population of 1 million or more. This includes 19 mega cities. These, Stephen, are populations that have 10 million or more people in them. Again, when you do see something in italics, that's something you want to study closely. And just keep in mind the patterns of change. Make sure you understand these process that in 1950, you only had 2 cities like that, Tokyo and New York. Today we got 19. This may double, in your lifetime. So more and more people moving into cities. This is part of the urban revolution. And when we talk about revolution, that word again means change. And it just speaks to like the way that people were living changed. The first urban revolution occurred 10,000 years ago. And this was the origin of cities. And this came through, again, the agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution, again, which also means change, that once they were able to produce more food, again, people walked around hunting and gathering all the time, hunting animals, woolly mammoth, bison, water buffalo, things like that. I was reading something the other day, Charles, in South America, they actually used to eat like llamas and alpacas. So whatever, they had going on, they were going to eat. Women would pick fruit from trees and stuff like that. But then once they were able to start farming, they could produce a whole bunch of food all at once. And it also made it so several things with this revolution. It made it, again, where you could stay settled in one place, because, again, hunting and gathering, Stephen, meant you have to keep moving around. Now we can stay in one place. One of the more important things about this as well is that it increased the division of labor, where before there were just 2 jobs, Stephen, just 2 jobs, hunting and gathering. The men did the hunting, the women did the gathering. Now you get all types of specialization. You get all types of jobs you can have. This is where you have like, maybe craftsmen that might help make tools and things like that. You have like a blacksmith. You have like, again, people that, were going to educate folks. You had people that were going to be responsible for defending the village. So all this began with the urban revolution that was spurred on by the agricultural revolution. Those 2 revolutions could not, are very much tied together. You could not have an urban revolution, Stephen, without an agricultural revolution. We also see another explosion in the late 18th century, when the Industrial Revolution began in England, and Manchester, England in particular. This again, where before, you're farming, you're using like, basic tools, hoes and things like that. They were able to like, develop plows. But with the Industrial Revolution, now you can use machines to do a lot of that work for you. So this is where I talked about before, where one of the first one was a water pump, where to get clean water to a village, as we talked about, Stephen, most of these cities overwhelmingly form near large bodies of water, particularly in the Middle East. Um, so they would have to take buckets by the water, by the sea, the river, wherever they live, and they would have to fill those buckets up and take them back into the village again and again and again and again. Now with a machine, it could do that for them, and it saved them all types of time, and it made it where people could farm a lot more efficiently. But the people that own the machines, Stephen, they had a huge advantage. And again, those machines initially, then and now, they weren't cheap. So the people that own the machines very quickly, they were able to kind of change the marketplace and make it where it was not as longer profitable to be a farmer. So now you have to come work in the factories for the people that own the machines. And that spurred even more of an urban revolution as more and more people came through the cities. And again, pardon me, I know we've gone over this before, but I just want to be as repetitive as possible to make sure it gets really hammered in. The world's top populated cities in 1950. Again, the main things I want you to study here, Stephen, not only the cities, but their placement in terms of where in the world they're located. So these are European and American cities in 1950, European and American cities in 1950. We got the Industrial Revolution first. In Africa, in much of Asia, they were experiencing the agricultural revolution still in the late 1800s and early 20th century. So you saw the Industrial Revolution happening in America and Europe. So that's why you see London, Paris, Berlin, Chicago, New York, places like that. That's again where people were coming to the factories to work in those jobs. Stephen, as you had explained, though, in our lifetime, a lot of those factory jobs have dried up. So again, in places like Flint, Michigan, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, where people used to come to those cities to work in the factories, now those factory shops, they go into India, they go into China. So now you got more and more people flooding into those cities to try and get jobs. Again, definitely study some of these testable terms very closely. I know it can be very difficult to mix some of them up. So we talk about, urbanization. That's the process of going from a rural to urban environment where the town where I live in, Rock Hill, I don't know if it can be quite considered urban yet, but it has a trajectory where it might. As again, more and more people, particularly as places like Charlotte become more expensive, more and more people want to live in a place like Rock Hill, and the population may go up to the point where it's urbanized in a way that Charlotte, eventually became, in a way that we see with Atlanta, the way that we see what's talking about with cities like Chicago in a couple of moments. Urban growth, again, just the rate of urban population increasing over time. This process is called an urban transition. And then most importantly, when we talk about symbolic interactionism, Charles, make sure that you keep in mind urbanism is just a state of mind that if you grow up in Atlanta, Philadelphia, New Orleans, that it gives you a certain perspective of how to see the world. You all had to write about, Jesuelschaft and Gemeinschaft and the urban-rural divide, if you will. Make sure you keep those terms in mind, and it speaks to how just your whole worldview perspective is very different, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. Cities, and again, we're talking about 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, good people. They were a concentration of power and culture. So we're talking about in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, going into Greece. And again, that this is where the power was at. This is where you got, the culture. It was an integrated society, meaning, Charles, that, in the major cities of, the Middle East back 9,000 years ago, you would have a lot of different types of people coming to these places, again, for different resources, different opportunities. Your survival rate was going to be better. Again, they had a lot of food in these places. It was close by the rivers. So a lot of people would be coming there, in short order, once these cities became established. That was true whether we're talking about, the city of Jericho. Most notably, again, for any biblical scholars out there, very familiar with the city of Jericho. It's a real place. the first ancient city. And people, again, would settle in these places, again, from all types of different places because they would get more opportunities to survival there. The same is true now in terms of why, so many people will go to like a Dallas, a Houston, or a Phoenix. These cities also were the site of social change and movement, where again, if you had new ideas or wanted to break away from your traditional customs, the cities were the places to do it 5,000 years ago and today. There are two approaches to looking at cities, and as social science students, hopefully you're familiar with both of these, as even though they apply to experience in cities, they relate to all elements of sociology. In a moment, we'll talk about the chapter on urban planning. We'll talk about the chapter on urban planning. And urban planning kind of, works, Stephen, and make sure you're taking notes on this stuff. Urban planning kind of works from the macro level perspective, where it's looking at a top-down perspective of the city. The bankers, the real estate agents, the politicians, how do they construct the model of a city? The micro level approach, again, is different. It's how the individuals experience the city. That, again, when we talk about a city like Miami, and again, make sure you take your notes on what you hear. A city like Miami, for example, that didn't just take its shape because of the politicians. Like it got such a Latin flavor down there because you had a lot of Latin people. You have a sizable Haitian American population in Miami, Charles, that also has, significant influence in shaping the city. The Creole culture of New Orleans. Again, that's not something that the politicians can create. When you think of, again, like the blues of a place like, Kansas City, hip hop in New York City, the politicians did everything they could to try and squash a lot of that energy. But through the micro level approach, Go-Go in DC, again, all these places, they the people kind of create a vibe and environment of the cities as well. That's working for the macro level approach. The macro, M-A-C-R-O, Charles, is what we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to urban planning. Again, we talked about, kind of the values of a city, and it's overstated a little bit, Stephen, but, we talk about, the divide between a rural environment, a small, this is probably definitely way before your time. It's before my time, so it's definitely before y'all's, but like the old Andy Griffith show, like Mayberry or something like that, small town type feel. Everybody know each other. You got like a small jail where it's just 2 prison cells because it ain't gonna be that much crime. That is not the city. The city values rationality more than emotionality. So again, like it may be the emotional right thing to do in a small town, Stephen, to help this homeless person. In an urban environment, again, urbanism, it kind of creates a mindset where everybody looks out for him and herself. This doesn't mean that city people are bad people.
That just goes into the connection that you were talking about earlier, like with different people and everything. I guess in a sense.
Absolutely, and just the fact that in a small town where I may know this person that's down there in their luck, I may know their cousin, as opposed to this person who's anonymous to me. Like the dude you talked about, I think it was you that talked about a couple of weeks ago, where you were looking, somebody was asking you for money, and
yeah,
and you were like, and they were kind of like out there hustling, where they didn't, look, I just come out here every day and pretend to be homeless. Like there are people that do things like that, like in major cities all the time. So, we're in a city environment where, be it again, the size of Columbia or the size of New York City, where you got a lot of people that are looking to get over on each other.
That's true.
And, there's a saying so my favorite hip hop group, they had a song like everything is fair when you live in the city, Tribe Called Quest. And they talk about how look, you ain't even gonna get mad at it. You understand it. Like everybody is trying to find a way to get over. So your job is to not get over on. like to not allow them to get over. And in that way, like again, it's rational. Like, you know, again, so no emotional relations. You know, I think I told the example. I took a city cab one time. I'm in Chicago. Like I was coming home late, and like it was gonna be forever waiting for the next train and everything. So I was like, let me just in the city cab. It's just where before Uber and all that, cats would just be having their cars like, hey, you need a ride? You know, and you know, you pay them like, you know, off the books and type stuff. Not always the safest move, but you know, I feel like I can handle myself. But anyway, we need to stop to get gas at some point. And dude asked me like, you know, hey, like, we need to get gas. You know, I was like, hey, I only got a 20, and he was like, he asked clear like, you know, give him the money and he'll bring me back change. And I was like, nah. And he's like, what? You don't trust me? I was like, no, of course not. It's like I don't trust. And I was like, look, I don't trust anybody. And very quickly he understood, like, yeah, okay, I understand. You know, like this is Chicago. Like, no, like, dude, what are you talking about? Do I trust you? No, I don't trust you. Like, and again, like it wasn't any, you know, so in that way, like it's understood. It will be irrational for me not to for me to trust somebody in that situation. So in that way, you know, the danger in it is that the notion that there's a breakdown of community because smaller communities are sustained by that kind of cooperation and trust in a way that just wouldn't work in an urban environment. The city values, again, money and personality, punctuality, again, like, you know, time really is money. There's so many things that to do, so many more demands of your time. So being late is highly frowned upon. Very much a blasé attitude in terms of like, you know, so again, punctuality where for the most part, Stephen, if the bus says it's coming at 8:04, like it's coming at 8:04. Like if you out there at 8:05 and 13 seconds, you show and your day's gonna be ruined. 8:04, dog. Like every time. You know, maybe it might be like 90 seconds later something. And if it is, people gonna be pissed the hell off. Where the hell is this bus is cold as hell? Blase attitude, again, you know, you're exposed to so many different things. They're going to shock your system. You kind of got to, you know, be desensitized to it all. And then again, we talked about whether it be 8,000 years ago or in Atlanta today, where people can walk around again and use transgender bathrooms if they like. There's a personal freedom that's unique to city environments. It's not unique to most places outside of it. We'll talk about in great detail with the urban planning and the city is imagery chapter, again, how images of the city, whether it be the pyramids in Cairo or the Golden Gate Bridge here in San Francisco, and again, these images that have been constructed by the urban planners from a macro level approach, Stephen, a macro level approach, that constructing these environments in this way does a lot, again, to attract people to the city, and it kind of like, you know, brings symbolic connections to the city. Let's look at the emergence of cities very quickly. And again, the purpose of this here is to try and do a little bit of review ahead of. Now, you all will still need to do some of this on your own. If there's anything I can do during office hours over the next couple of weeks, don't hesitate to let me know. Do note and write this down, please. Our exam is on March 3rd. So please make note of that. So we talked about, again, the emergence of cities, that it requires large urban settlements, first of all, obviously, and two things: sufficient surplus in food that was driven, and what event brought in that surplus of food again? What event was it that brought in that surplus of food?
The agricultural revolution.
Very good, Stephen. One extra credit point. So the agricultural revolution brought in a surplus of food and quickly other necessities. Once man had enough to eat, he wanted some other things as well. Let me get some spices. Let me get some salt. Let me get some sugar. Later, we're not going to get into that here. Like real talk, a large part of the reason for slavery and all that is that they needed somebody to do the work to get all that stuff. That after a while, they all these things that produced, it was like, you know, even then, like, you know, I'm sure, of course, you know, in ancient Egypt and all those places, they had slaves as well. It was a very different form of slavery. But very quickly, they found like, oh, hell no, it's too much work to be done. We're going to need more people.
Would you say that's like that just basically went into all this all the outside of the slave trade? You like how you mentioned spices. There was like a what was the name of the trade? Was it a triangular trade would that go into the triangular trade and how Africa and North America, and I want to say it was another continent that were just all
Sure.
different? Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. The Europeans would send their ships to get all types of goods, sugar, coffee, chocolate, gold, tobacco. In North and South America, they would need people to do that work that they got from Africa. And all those profits went back to Europe for generation after generation, and then ultimately to European Americans. Meanwhile, what's going on with the rest of the world while that's happening? A lot of these goods and supplies that come from countries that are today poor, but those countries weren't poor, they were very resource rich. Again, these surpluses these came, all this stuff started in Africa. This again is not anything that's controversial whatsoever. So this again is where you would have the surplus. During this time, again, Europe, again, where you had Neanderthals, which are a now extinct inferior form of human species that are only found on the European continent. Factually true. It was a cold and desolate place. Very little was produced there at all. People did not live in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years because there just wasn't nothing there. So the surplus, again, developed in the area called the Fertile Crescent, modern day Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq. And you had, again, more than enough food and other necessities to survive. But very quickly, Stephen, they need to find some way to organize all this stuff. Okay, look, we got all this food. How are we going to figure out a way to try and sustain it all? The first places where this was experienced, and this is definitely something that you want to know in preparing for the midterm, that the 7 civilizations where you had the earliest cities. So again, these are, the early quote unquote countries. Not understood as countries in the way that we understand them now. But you had Mesopotamia. That's again, is modern Iraq, ancient Egypt, the Indus River Valley area of modern Pakistan and parts of India. You had the yellow, and again, notice the water. So with Egypt, it was the Nile, the Euphrates with Mesopotamia. So Mexico, again, to proceed, whether it be the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi, I think definitely parts of the Pacific. Same again with Guatemala, Honduras, and Peru, where you had, again, Aztec and Inca civilizations that would emerge over time. The Incas in Peru, the Aztecs in Mexico. And again, all this was brought about through the agricultural revolution, Stephen, where after 500,000 years, actually, we'll say 500. 200,000 is Homo sapiens. Where again, they saw berries, fruit, roots, and nuts. And this has been the human condition through most of our time, the vast majority of the time on the planet. Agricultural, industrial, and now the post-industrial revolution that we'll talk about in the second half of the class. All of those are relatively new phenomena. The unique qualities of these early cities included, again, having large permanent settlements. But we began to very quickly, for the first time, again, have social classes. Where before there were just 2 jobs. Where were those 2 jobs again?
Hunting. The men would hunt and the women would gather.
Good, Charles. One extra credit point. But now we have a lot more diverse positions. We only need a few people to produce the food. We can have other people doing other jobs. To maintain this surplus, we found that they needed to be able to sustain it. So the rulers of these early cities, they quickly found that they had to tax people again. People wanted to come to these places from all across the world and be able to take again advantage, Stephen, of their surplus. So it's okay, cool. If you want to enjoy the surplus of New York City, you're gonna have to pay for it. And of course, now we're talking about cities like Europe and places like that. But the same thing holds true now. Cities, to live in a city, it costs more money than it does, on the outskirts. The taxes are a lot more robust That was true in the early cities. That's certainly true now. They also wanted to, like, again, part of the things they wanted to do is create, like, again, a lot of public buildings. So we talked about from the inception, I just showed you an image of the Golden Gate Bridge. But since there have been cities, there have been great efforts made to really like showcase and highlight and beautify them to make, drop more and more people in. These cities, again, also where you first saw the invention of a written language, they began to use like, some basic symbols to try and keep, and again, this is done to kind of keep track of the business. You're producing all these goods, you need some way to tally it. So in Mesopotamia, they start to have like some rudimentary symbols around 9,000 BC. And then ultimately the first written language will be developed in Egypt amongst Black folks. There were some concerns about urban growth. Again, like, that the diversity, well, we talked about, again, you have so many different people. That doesn't mean that this always came easy. It still don't come easy. Again, places like New York, Chicago are very diverse. Like, that wasn't a smooth process. Like, again, with the Great Migration, with like, so many Black people coming to Chicago in particular, like they were greeted with great hostility. Like all types of race riots and stuff up north. Like, don't get it twisted. These also were not the most sanitized places. Then and now, again, you got so many people. You got a lot more waste and stuff, Stephen. So it's like, how are we going to keep these places clean? If you can't keep these places clean, then there's going to be all types of health issues. The food quality is going to suffer. So as a result, you had like a lot of times a high mortality rate. Because again, like initially, Charles, a lot of people just came and they didn't really have any kind of management organization to it. Like I said, it would be a situation where like all of a sudden, Allen got like, 3,000 students, but there was no kind of planning or structure to it. Like, okay, look, let's put these people in the dorms. Like, look, I know this toilet been stopped up for like 3 days. We'll figure it out. And at this time, there was no like real lack of knowledge about the role that sanitation played. This wouldn't come, Stephen, until like the late 19th century, early 20th century, where we began to figure out like, hey, if we can clean the water, that can like help like with all types of diseases. Like we like thousands of years, millions of years is going by before humans understood that. And then like we got like, microscopes and we're able to look at, bacteria and water and stuff like that. And once they put that stuff under the scope, some of this water that they were drinking back then, not back during these early times, but back in the 19th century, they would put some of that water in the scope. Like, oh shit! Like, all types of crazy stuff in the water. Like, oh my God, you're drinking this. So us having to, and keep this in mind, right? Because we take this for granted in our times here now. But when I talked about, Stephen, in a lot of these cities, are exploding in population in the African and East Asia. A lot of these places do not have the kind of clean water that they had back in ancient Egypt back in the day. Like, clean water, unfortunately, is becoming more and more like there's a reason why so many of us are drinking bottled water today. Like our parents and grandparents wasn't doing all that stuff. Like, so the fact that, again, through and for 2 extra credit points, what process do you think has been most instrumental to us not having as much clean water? What process do you think that we've talked about so far is most instrumental to us not having as much clean water? Critical thinking. Y'all just be listening, man. Y'all be following this stuff.
Would it be the amount of people like coming to the cities, like using the same water and stuff?
Nope, because and let me be more clear. Like, so yes, it's definitely affecting the cities, but this is a global phenomenon. That even in rural areas, it's more difficult to get clean water today. Why do y'all think that is?
Probably pollution.
Couple things. A couple major processes that we've talked about played a major role.
I'm thinking pollution. Everybody keeps dumping their waste and trash into the oceans.
Oh, the fact could it also have been the factories back then? Like you said, you talked about sanitation, right? But no,
Yeah.
you said also urban too. You also said the local community.
You're on the right track. Both of y'all are. Both of y'all on the right track. Keep thinking about it.
Mm.
Y'all almost there.
Barry, you think could have been the migration from like different areas, like like just like how you said they didn't have no real doctors, nothing like that back then.
Yep.
So
Exactly. So there have been like different diseases.
Nope. So the Industrial Revolution is what brought the machines. And the use of those machines, like it sounds all good. We're going to produce more and more and more. We're going to make more stuff. Those machines produce all types of waste. So yes, so Stephen, part of what they did when these factories would like go and make stuff and produce all types of hazardous stuff, they would pour a lot of that stuff right into the lakes and the rivers, dog. Okay, we got all this toxic waste. Okay, let's put it over here. It'll be fine. All types of things going into the air, so our air quality. So the process of the Industrial Revolution, and then even more craziness in terms of even the agricultural revolution, where before in the early times, right, we producing enough food just to be able to sustain ourselves. Now we try to produce enough food to try and sell as many products as possible. And that means that we got to produce a lot more cows and chicken and sheep than probably the earth was prepared to sustain. Those animals make a lot of waste. Where does that waste go?
just like you said,
in all our waterways, dog.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times, then once they realize this stuff, they will put more and more chemicals in the water, and makes it where it is very, very, very unsafe to drink. All that happened began with the Industrial Revolution. By making quote unquote human progress and making more money and making it where we can get more stuff, we've done a lot of damage to the environment. This process began. So again, look, it is really important. This is why I say you got to put on your critical thinking hat. I lived during these times and everything. Y'all see, there are efforts being made to make it where they don't make cars. GM just signed a deal, right, where they're not going to make cars they run on gasoline no more, within 20, 30 years. That's because we know the harm that these products do. But for many years, we didn't care. We just wanted to get that money. I'm sorry, Charles.
No, you're fine. I guess I'm kind of getting the gist of what you're talking about. That just goes into, just like how you mentioned that with GMC, that goes into how those fumes that affects the ozone layer, and that can go into global warming and all the other issues that I get where you're coming from now. I'm catching where you're going now.
Absolutely. And stay with me just a little bit more. So again, the early cities, again, they have population just less than 2,000 people. So again, nowhere near the millions, the 10 million that you may have in a Tokyo or something like that today. Ancient Rome got up to about 600,000 at its peak. But with the Industrial Revolution, we began to see these populations really take off. And again, you got these machines that are doing the work for human beings a lot faster. Again, a machine like that before, people have to get around using a horse and buggy. Now, not quite in the 1800s yet, but eventually we're going to be able to use a machine with horsepower. That's not, that term is not just something that's happenstance. That's really what it referred to. And hey, this car, these 8 horses that you used to be able to use to get here, now this car can do this in way faster time. So again, right, a car and it took a while, right? The first cars, that were made, for example, a horse would beat them. It'd be if you was in your little 3rd grade go-kart or something like that. Horse would be like, dude, get your ass up out of here. We would it wouldn't get into the 20th century, Steve, and again, the first cars were shit. But it would get into the 1940s and 50s, they would build cars that could really do some things. But the point being that, at least this machine can do the work for you. Even with riding a horse and buggy and stuff like that, I got to be doing stuff. What if the horse is all lazy and stuff? I got to be hitting this dude. Now I can just sit back and chill. So machines serve this purpose in all types of ways. And it made it where farmers could no longer do their work as efficiently. They had to come work in the factories, and they came to places like London, Paris, Berlin, and Vienna. Again, they set up a division of labor where you have more and more specialists in different types of jobs. They had to find out what were they going to do with all these children that were now living in these cities. And you begin to see some shock cities where you just had major astronomical levels of growth. The poor in Manchester, England, they had a tough time of it. They worked really long hours. They worked 6 days a week. They were paid really low wages. The people that came there, these used to be farmers, Stephen, but now because of the Industrial Revolution, they have to go work in the cities. And they usually put off in far off areas and everything, way away from the rich people who own the machines. And again, the wealthy, like the cities were designed where the wealthy people could be really removed from that. Again, there was an anti-urbanism perspective and framework because the cities were seen as these, like, really socially disorganized places where you didn't have cooperation and fellowship. You couldn't have personal relationships. Again, everybody is, rude like Charles, not giving money to like the homeless and stuff. Guyman Shelf, again, is, the type of communities that, the rural small town communities, the rural small, again, make sure you take your notes while you're looking at what's on the screen. I highly recommend that you go back because, again, we're still, even at this late date, and some of this is just unfortunate nature of American education, I still feel like there's too much attempts at memorization, which you're not going to be able to do. What you got to do, like education, is understanding. When you actually just try and understand, like again, like in watching football and stuff like that, like that doesn't mean that you go and like try and memorize every single play and memorize all the stats. But the more and more you expose yourself to the game, you can understand the whole picture and how those stats like fit in, and it makes it a lot easier for you to remember different numbers and things like that. So the same way that you've come to understand almost anything, use those skills here. Your descriptive status, who you were born as, was more important than your achieved status. Again, the family you were born into was the most important thing in the Guyman Shelf community, where the communities were a lot more homogenous, that everybody would be Lutheran, everybody would be Catholic, everybody would be Hispanic, everybody would be Amish, et cetera, et cetera. Jesuit Shaft, again, more urbanized environments where you're going to have much wider and impersonal relations. And this led to a mechanical and organic solidarity in terms of division of labor. In all of this, bridges into, we're going to get cut off in a moment. All this bridges into discussion on the Chicago school, where again, the main feature of this chapter is that Chicago, much like Manchester, we talk about again, a shock city, where the population increased at a really, really dramatic rate in a short amount of time, that people aren't always prepared to be able to take on. So you had all types of crime, a lot of poverty, poor housing, poor sanitation. And it kind of created a different type of person through urbanism, a state of mind. And there was this perception that, again, like, that you had these low-class people, and a lot of it will be explained away by the groups they belong to. These Italian people are just so genetically inferior. These Irish people, they're drunkards. These Black people, again, they're, inferior. And the Chicago school academics, they weren't satisfied with that. So they went and studied the communities in which these people came from. And they found that it was the urban environments that kind of influenced their behavior and thinking. And this is how we came to have urbanism. We'll leave it there for now, but continue to pick up again where we left off. And I highly recommend that you take some time to look this back over if there is anything that you missed here today. Make sure that you stay up to speed as laid out in the syllabus, and I'll see you all at this time on Wednesday.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.